equate the fact that there will never be any progress without recognition, regret, and recompense. Otherwise, we are destined to replicate the idiocies of our past. I'm going this live on Facebook, YouTube, and I will later on publish it to Instagram if they will take the post on there. But here's the thing. A lot of people think that because the lockdowns have been reduced, that we are somehow heading forwards into a new world where things are slowly going back to some kind of old normal. They're not. Very recently, in the last, since March or so of this year, we have a situation in which the conflict in Ukraine has created several world crises. Add to that the fact that for reason or reasons unknown, the extreme weather events which are running around all over the world are causing supply chain issues. They're causing massive inflation of basic food supplies and so on. And many of the so-called third world countries under a lot of debt pressure to maintain the loans which they've taken from the international financial organizations, which will effectively wind up with them being mortgaged to the West. So when I look at the situation here, and I'm a member of various organizations, and you hear people talking about world peace, how we should come together to form a happier world and so on, and how it's the only way for humanity to get along with each other. And you know it's not going to happen, because when I observe the behavior of ordinary people, and these are all perfectly ordinary, sensible, decent people, when they talk about world peace, they mean world peace based on people who look like them. Their conception of world peace extends usually to their class, their ethnicity, their geography, their cultural outlook, their religious background, and so on. But in a world which is incredibly diverse, we know that that's not a basis for world peace. That is actually a peace imposed by the hegemony of those with the military muscle to impose their idea of how the world should be on everybody else. It is completely unacceptable. Now, I remember when I was a little boy in my religious studies classes, this was in prep school. I must have been, maybe 8.5, 9 years old or something. The lady who used to teach us religious studies talked about how to get straight with the Creator, how to get straight with God, if you like. And she said, Mrs. Jones said that, there is no way you can change any situation unless you do the 3 R's. The 3 R's are recognition, regret, and recompense. Recognition of the fact that you've done something wrong in the first place, that you've gone about things in a way which was less than optimal, in a way that didn't treat your fellow man right. That's the first thing, is recognition. The second thing is that once you recognize that we didn't do something quite right, then there has to be a natural, heartfelt sense of regret for what one has done in the past, so that going forward, we decide that we will spontaneously make recompense or set about and put in place arrangements which ensure that we will not replicate the errors of the past. So we got to recognize, regret, and then make recompense for the things that have gone wrong. I'm going to cut to a situation of domestic violence. I've read so many events, I've read so many stories and narratives of domestic violence where um, you have the abusive husband who comes home, treats his spouse extremely badly, and then pretends everything is okay the next morning when he's sober, or when he's got over his hump, or the mind uh, meltdown that they had before. But until the person actively apologizes for what they have done, do not for 1 second expect that they are going to change their behavior in the future. In fact, even when they apologize for what they've done in the past, you've got to be very careful to observe what it is he's going to do to show that he has genuine remorse or regret for what he's done. And most importantly of all, what arrangements they are going to put in place to make sure that those situations aren't replicated again. Now, one of the things I notice is that people who were happy to call immigrants cockroaches, who have suddenly become advocates of humanity. The very people who were calling mostly non-European people cockroaches in the past, okay, are suddenly now becoming advocates for human rights, for human liberty, for avoiding censorship, for the medical autonomy of people, um, the freedom of individuals to choose their God-given right to their liberties, and so on. All of a sudden, these people, without an iota of regret or recognition of the disgusting attitudes that they've demonstrated in the past, are suddenly become the architects, the arbiters, shall we say, of civil rights, human rights, and so on and so forth. They're all liars. What it means is that they have encountered a situation in which, whereas previously they perceived themselves as top dog and could do what the heck they liked with impunity almost, they've suddenly realized that they are now vulnerable. And so they suddenly become advocates of human rights. It's all so very wrong. I'm going to go to my go-to model for explaining what we all have in common. Europe has got roughly 750 million people on the continental European space. Africa, say, has got roughly 1.3 billion people on the continental African space. You can pack Europe more than 10 times into the continent of Africa. I just use this as an example to show how diverse the world is, and how it's not actually a question of how many people there are in one part of the world over the other that makes that part of the world more or less important. If there is one human being in a particular place, then that person, as a member of mankind, needs and deserves to have the respect of other human beings. So that's where we are. Now, if we're going to make progress, then it means that this idea that world peace starts in my village and ends there, in my class and ends there, in my ethnic background and ends there, in my educational standard and ends there, in the way I look and ends there, in my gender and ends there. All of these ideas have got to be completely kicked to the curb if we are going to make recompense for what happened in the past, not only do we have to recognize that the hypocrisy of those mostly liberal people who suddenly they're basically behaving as if the world has not been written through a narrative of the grossest exploitation by the tiny minority over the huge majority. Not only must we recognize that that sort of behavior is no longer valid for the future, we must actually now set things in place to completely rewrite that narrative. Now, in this, I mean, I can't tell anybody what to do. We all have different parts to play in the mix. There are organizations like ADPAC, for which I have a huge amount of admiration, who are trying on a systemic and institutionalized basis to try and show the worth and value and institutionalize the worth and value of people of non-European origin into the totem pole of the world, as if we all definitely matter. Not the kind of, oh, we'll pay lip service to we all do matter and so on. And the rampant hypocrisy of, I'll just take our erstwhile prime minister, who used to call, Muslim women letterboxes, and said that Africans had watermelon smiles, and suggested that the problem for Africa was the fact that Britain was no longer in charge of Africa. Wouldn't it be ironic then that the country that was colonized is one of the countries by Britain, it's one of the countries that may well be providing the next prime minister of the United Kingdom. So you can see that the old world way of doing things, where a few dominant, very, very few dominant people decide for the rest of us how we should live, those days are gone. Those days are past. And I'm going to end this by saying this, that one of the oldest tricks in the book that those who are few in number and big in wallet have had to control the world has been divide and rule. They play one end against the other, and the rest of the people have just observed what's going on, looked left, looked right, seen where their advantage lies, and just basically cast a blind eye to the fact that their standard of living is based on A, the despoilation of the world, and B, the notion that their lives are worth 10 times more than everybody else's lives. Now, of course, many people will just scoot right on past this post. They just will. Why? It's because what is being shown is that we are not yet mature. Hear that again. We are not yet mature enough to understand that if we don't recognize what went wrong, we are destined to repeat the same errors. If we don't regret what has gone wrong, we will not find genuine, heartfelt ways of making recompense for what happened in the past. And it'll be business as usual. The social media platforms will dumb you down into non-existence. They will treat you like mindless amoeba who lack any kind of insight or wisdom or spirituality or awareness of yourself as a human being. If you need to be restricted to 3-minute memes, and that is the length and breadth of your intellectual capacity, your wisdom, and your insight, then those elites who plan to treat mankind basically as useless feeders, as chattels, to be thrown first this way and then that way, while telling you that you are superior, having demonstrated the staggering lack of insight. Let me say that again. Having demonstrated the staggering degree of ignorance, ignorance, and lack of awareness. As long as we're going to continue living like that, then we have a very difficult world coming ahead for us. But if we recognize what went wrong, we genuinely show a degree of regret for it, and thirdly, start taking steps. We all have different parts to play in this. As I've said, there are organizations which are making institutional changes. There are people who are involved in education. There are people who are involved in gender affairs. There are people who are ninjas in terms of the natural environment. We have to have a completely different economic model, one which disaggregates power from the hands of a few self-appointed experts whose humanity and psychopathy is writ large by their behavior and their utterances. Until we are able to get beyond all of these things, we are headed for a very difficult world. Thanks so much for listening. And do share this video with others. Do comment and do ponder for a moment what it is, not what I'm going to do. I'm doing my bit now. What are you going to do to bring about the kind of world which won't require that we are treated like so many chattel, so many cattle in the herd to be controlled as we will be by those who think, although they lack any kind of humanity whatsoever, who think they know better than we do what is good for ourselves. Thanks so much for joining me.